This week, our guest is Jim Edwards. Jim has been a staffer in the House. He's been a staffer in the Senate. He is an advisor to the Eagle Forum. He has been in the IP world for his entire career from a policy perspective. We're going to talk to Jim about a lot of things today on the policy side, the legislation side, what has chance, what does not necessarily have a chance, anything else he may want to talk to us about, the inside baseball, what's going on Capitol Hill. But we're also going to be talking about Jim's new book, which is just about to publish here. And Jim, it's a pleasure to have you join us here today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Gene, for having me. It's an honor to be on your show and to be any part of IP Watchdog.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's always nice to have a chat with a friend. We've known each other for many years. And because it seems to me that we in the U.S. have kind of gotten away from a strong property rights-based system, not just intellectual property. People seem to me to look differently at property than once upon a time. I know you write about property rights a lot for us, and you liken IP to real estate, to land specifically. Am I making a mountain out of a molehill here, do you think?
No, I mean, the reason that I've started Conservatives for Property Rights, a coalition that I run, we advocate for individual private property rights for all forms of property. And we say that, if you're talking about your land, your real estate, that's property that needs to be your rights protected for. Also, your financial holdings, your pay, your pension, whatever it may be, and then if it's your personal possessions, your car, your guitar, your house. I mean, not your house. Your favorite record album. Some of us still have albums, and even youngsters have them more and more these days.
Yeah, they're making a comeback.
Yes, they know what they are. So all those things are important, but so are, and especially to me, especially as intellectual property, because you're talking about all these other categories. They're property that pre-existed your involvement with them. With intellectual property, it's property that you created. You had an idea that you developed into something tangible and either written or musical or all those things, but in some tangible medium. And then also in the patent space it's something that is new, useful, and isn't obvious. So it's very much property that did not previously exist. Who's going to own that thing? The common sense, obvious answer is plain. The one who had the idea and worked it to something.
Mm. So there's much that can be said about property rights and IP, and I fundamentally don't understand why people don't. I'll just say I don't think they get it, because you can't invest in something you don't own. The only people, and maybe I'll make a caveat to it, the only people that can invest in what they don't own are the incumbents, the largest players who don't need rights because they can throw around their weight. And I look around and I see a lot of these companies, and not to say anything bad about them. I mean, they have their point of view, and I think some of them are extreme. Most of them are probably not extreme. They're just advocating positions that are favorable to them, and
Mm-hmm.
I can't begrudge that. But when you look around at their size, these companies are the size of some small countries.
Yes.
And, we kind of in the United States, I think we fought this battle a little bit with Teddy Roosevelt when he took on these gigantic corporations in the early 1900s. And we're back there again. And I just think that, if you don't have a way to combat the largesse and give the smaller company the opportunity to become bigger, because the small companies are the ones that take the risks. Large companies don't take risks. And they also have no incentive, ironically, to get the best and newest innovation out, because they want to squeeze every last ounce of juice out of the previous one before they move on to what's next. So it's not an economy that fosters the greatest innovation. And we could either have like a patronage system like they did hundreds of years ago, or we could just say the government's going to recognize what you've created, as long as it's new and useful, as yours and not somebody else's. And if somebody else wants it, that's fine. That's an opportunity to negotiate. But I mean, when you're talking to people on the other side of the aisle, maybe this is the question with that preface. It seems to me that in your role as a lobbyist and a deal maker and bringing people together inside the Beltway, you've got to try and understand their perspective so that you can reach them. But how do you understand their perspective?
It takes trying to put yourself in their shoes, and it's really a difficult conversation to begin with. It's a difficult conversation throughout, and it's a difficult conversation at every point, because there is a divide on the underlying assumptions on each side, and those are at odds. So the discussion on XYZ bill today or ABC regulation tomorrow, it's the underlying assumptions. Theirs, in my view, are flawed. Mine are right, and they seem the exact opposite of that. So it's having the willingness to listen to them, and sometimes they have valid points from my point of view, and sometimes they don't. And it's how you treat them. Do you give them a fair hearing and assess what they say on the merits as you see them, and that's really the means of getting to legislative or policy progress. Because without that, you're just talking past each other, and frankly, too much of the talking past each other model is the norm these days.
Yeah, it seems like that's why we have gridlock. Nobody is listening to the other side, because I do think the other side has an important perspective. I mean, and one of the things that I've tried to do over the last couple of years is to get that perspective out from or maybe the way to say it is to get the factual predicate out, because I do think the other side has a bunch of really nefarious characters who go and they buy up a marginal patent at best that has often little or nothing to do with the company they're going after. And then they just try and extort those companies. We know that happens. Now, I don't think that happens nearly on the level that we've been led to believe that happens. But I do think that there's bad actors. But I also think there's bad actors on the other side as well. I mean, they don't want to. They want to take. They don't want to pay. They want to do. And I think that all too often, and it's probably for, in some ways, legitimate reasons, people don't want to talk about the facts or the reality of what they see, because a lot of them are engaged in litigation, and your lawyers are always, don't talk to anybody, don't tell anybody anything. So getting what are you really concerned about? Because maybe we can solve my problem without causing you pain. Mm-hmm. Getting that conversation going has just, I think, been fundamentally impossible. Have you seen that as well?
Yes, and your point about there being bad actors on both sides, I mean, that says anything in life. I mean, there are bad doctors, there are great doctors. Most doctors are good and reputable. There are bad lawyers and there are good lawyers, and most of them are perfectly reputable. So it's in every field. I mean, plumbers, pick whatever you want to say.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing too, is like people will point to the so-called patent trolls, and they're like, well, they're just abusing the judicial process. Okay, I can see that we know that there have been some people very famously charged with that, and I think proven to be having done those types of things. But at the same point in time, it's like that's everywhere, right? I mean, the judicial system is like any other system. It can be rigged. It can run smoothly. It can be abused, and creative people can identify inefficiencies. And when those inefficiencies are identified, they can be exploited, and they are, right? I mean, it's patents is not a unique system.
Exactly. The other thing that came to mind as you were talking was, is oftentimes in the legislative or policy realm, it's act first, think later, if you ever think. And so there's a lot of legislating by anecdote. And I've seen it over the years in my time on the Hill and in around the Hill, dealing with the Hill and the regulatory bodies as well. But there's one, there was one patent push in the 90s when I was in one of the House offices I worked in. And they had the advocates for making these significant changes to patents. At the time, they were going after submarine patents, they called them. And they had one example,
Right.
One guy. I said, well, how big is this problem? And can you demonstrate the significance of it, And they had no data. They had no facts or statistics. They had an anecdote. One guy who had supposedly had all these, they called them submarine patents. And they spring them on out of the blue on the big incumbent companies who have some patents on something related. So it's kind of a gotcha / troll type scenario, but none of those lobbyists, to my satisfaction, could give any kind of thing approaching to a cogent, fact-based, evidence-based, not rational, not emotional type of argument. It was just flooring me. And these are major companies,
Yeah, I think that the issue there is it becomes the biggest issue for them because they have a problem.
Yes.
And to some extent, I think that they really don't care. And this is not just point fingers at any one company. I think sometimes the inventor groups and the pro-patent side can fall into this as well. Everybody can, right? Whatever affects you is overwhelmingly important. Right. What affects?
That's right.
And if it may be a small problem relative to the overall system, but it affects you, so it's super important. And I also think that that's one of the reasons why the court should just stay out of the policy making end of really everything.
Yes.
They're there to handle disputes between two
parties
or two parties, right? And say, okay, and since you all haven't been able to resolve this on your own, then I've got to make a decision as the judge, right? Congress is supposed to be the branch that they can hold hearings, they have subpoena power, they can ask questions, they can follow up, they can send their staffers out, for depositions or to investigate and figure out what's really going on so that they can do what's right for the overall system. And in our space, it feels like Congress has kind of abdicated. I think they thought, many of them, what they were doing with the AIA was fine. They can put patents to bed for another 50 years and they don't have to deal with it again. And that wasn't what happened. And so, there's a human element to all of this, right? You blow, if it affects you, you blow it out of proportion.
Mm-hmm. Quite so.
But then what winds up happening is it feels like the squeaky wheel winds up getting what they want, that then it does throw oftentimes 90+% of the industry into the wind. And that's why I've always characterized this as it feels to a large extent to me like the way that patent system, and particularly patents, has grown up over the last generation now, really,
Right.
is like we're all in the third grade. And, there's one person who can't sit still in his seat or her seat. They talk out of turn. You're going to lunch and the teacher says, okay, everybody be quiet, no talking. Other classes are going on. And then you got one kid who just can't help themselves, and is the class clown or whatever it may be. And then the whole class gets in trouble, for that one person. And
Yes.
maybe that's my experience having gone to Catholic grammar school, but it feels like we're back in third grade. Okay, there's a bad actor over there. Why don't we try and solve for the bad actor rather than throw the whole system away? And it also strikes me that in an industry where there are so many engineers, no engineer in the world would take a system that more or less functions and rip it up and throw it away and start over. You just wouldn't do that. I mean, you do that as the last resort, not as the first resort. You tweak around the edges. And I just don't see a lot of tweaking around the edges, and I also see an awful lot of times when things really are begging to be, like with 101, for example. The courts don't want to touch it, at least the Supreme Court doesn't want to touch it. The Federal Circuit is uninterested in doing anything, in my opinion, that makes common sense. And Congress, they can't get on the same page. So it's like, okay, well, we'll just, wait another year. All the while, China is starting to eat our lunch, if they haven't already, in areas like AI.
Yes.
How is that resonating on the Hill? I mean, is that going to have a breakthrough moment like happened with Japan in the 80s, and the fear that the Japanese were just so technologically superior?
Well, there's hope, but I wouldn't say the certainty is for sure is not there. The reason I think is that people are concerned about China. They do understand China is growing in technological ability and status and better technology than they've ever made before, and it's in some cases with us or surpassing us a little. So there is an understanding. It's broadened over the past several years. It's widespread, but the people who had the answers a while ago aren't really being heard. There's a disconnect between here's China and the threat to our competitiveness, national security, economic security, technological prowess, and then here is the same set of solutions or the quote-unquote solutions that are really worsening the problem by weakening our patent system, because there's just a disconnect and a misunderstanding of the role of patents and IP. And really that's one of the main things I try to stress in my new book is that we're talking about property that did not exist. There's something much larger and more fundamental about the existence of creativity and the inherent ownership that normatively connects with each other. Ownership has to come with creativity. If you've got creative ability but you don't have ownership of what you make, that doesn't work. If you have ownership but you don't have creativity, you don't have solutions. You got to go to somebody else who does have the creativity. Think about it. The default setting for humanity is poverty. There's no property, there's nothing until someone comes up with an idea and makes something, makes a wheel, makes a shovel, makes a hammer, whatever. and then does things with it to improve the environment in which she lives, to get shelter, food, and all the necessary things, and then builds upon that for other purposes. But if there's creativity, ownership combined, the result overcomes that basic poverty that would exist were it not for creativity and ownership and some semblance of property rights to benefit the people who create something that didn't previously exist.
Right. So there's a couple things there that come to mind when you're talking about that, and they're maybe somewhat related, with respect to the property aspect of it. One is, it strikes me that what you were just describing largely is what Lincoln tried to describe when, the fire of creative genius speech. That, if people have the fire in the belly and the means to be able to do something with that, then great things can happen. But you need to have both components.
Yes.
You need to have the ability for them to succeed, and then they have to have the creative moment. And you don't want these passing in the night like ships. The one needs the other, and the other needs the one. These go hand in hand. Is creative people can be inspired to do really great things, and maybe the argument is that, well, the creative people will create. Yeah, okay, creative people will create. But the example I always used when I was teaching students is like, I like Van Gogh. Van Gogh just speaks to me in a way that other of the great masters do not. So I would love to have had Van Gogh paint even more, right? So if Van Gogh was today and had to be flipping burgers at McDonald's in order to make a living, to pay rent, and then only could paint a fraction of the time, then the world, for me, would not be nearly as great a place.
Right.
Whereas if Van Gogh could spend every waking moment that he wants painting and then make money from that because people like it, then that gets him to do more and more and more, and the world flourishes. That's the whole constitutional point. The other thing that comes to mind is that people who doubt that you need to have the ability to own. I mean, just look at third world countries, right? I mean, there's a reason that property is dilapidated in a lot of those countries. You don't know today, if I invest today, will I own it tomorrow? The government might just come in and take it. And we see that all throughout history.
Yes.
In repressive regimes that don't respect property rights, or that did respect property rights, and then there's a change in the regime, they just come in and confiscate. And you can't invest in something when there's a risk of confiscation. And we see that time and time again. It's the human condition.
That's
so a couple
right.
thoughts there. If you want to take one or the other, go for it.
Yes. You're right that expropriation renders property rights, whatever they are, tentative, doesn't it? And with that tentative nature of property rights, there's no certainty, there's no ability to get investment into your idea or to underwrite your project to commercialize it. All of that goes away, or at least diminishes. The thing about the creativity and ownership is that these are abilities, faculties, attributes that are shared with us, and we need to be responsible for them. And who benefits from the output, the creations, and if there's creation and ownership, the products and things that derive from that benefit society generally at this time and perhaps into the future. At least at a minimum, it's laying groundwork for future developments. I mean, obviously, somebody a long time ago created the wheel, and we've got wheels still, and this essentially the same thing, but they're a whole lot better and much more variety and all of that for different purposes. You've got the underpinnings of 5G, 6G coming next technology in wireless communications that the groundwork was laid by Faraday and others before him in electromagnetism, developing and inventing a dynamo. Those sorts of things lay the groundwork to get to where we are today. So it didn't all start with Hedy Lamarr, with her related invention of CDMA, but it did bring about that, and that is what has a key part of our current, state-of-the-art wireless communication.
Yeah, it strikes me that listening to you talk about, how all these different pieces and parts, they fit together. You need one and you need the other as well. It's pretty uncommon for inventors who are creative, for example, whether it be, I shouldn't just say inventors, creators, whether it be painters or sculptors or musicians or inventors, to have the part of the brain active that makes the creation really valuable. And then also to have the business acumen in order to do something with that. So, but you need all of these different pieces together. And that's, I think, what the genius of the modern day intellectual property system is you define the rights in the creator in the first instance, who then, if the creator holds on to it too tightly, then nothing's going to happen. The creator needs other pieces and other people with other skill sets to collaborate, and that's when you start to really get real greatness happen.
Yes.
So it's not to say, like I mentioned before, these big giant companies, they control the channels of distribution and manufacturing and marketing, and there's nothing wrong with that, because there's a lot of inventors, most inventors probably could never do that. It's not in their skill set.
Right.
But you put these two pieces together and they fit like puzzle pieces. And it strikes me that one of the real things that have gone awry in our system over the last generation is not valuing each party's contribution to the effort, and thinking that, my contribution is the most important and you can't do it without me. True, but you can't do it without the others as well. And our system was just humming along and everything was fine. It seemed like the Federal Circuit was doing well. They were getting, and then I don't know have you given any thought to what happened to cause this to go off the rails?
Well, part of it was those in government were thinking, how can we expand this to around the world? We've got a good secure, patent system that relies not only on the ingenuity part, but the property rights aspect, private property rights prior to oil states, but they wanted to do things which ended up connected to trade and the World Trade Organization creation and the TRIPS waiver. The TRIPS waiver was a substantial advancement in terms of at least putting a minimum amount of IP protection around the world by all the countries that sign up for the WTO. Not all of them live up to the TRIPS obligations, but at least it's something to have some enforcement of and some advantage, and at least it's the law on the books, which was helpful. But then the large corporations, many of whom you're not naming, but who fall into the category of pushing free trade, global free trade. The globalist approach is not like it's evil, but it changes things, and where it factors out in patents, I think of Phyllis Schlafly, who founded Eagle Forum Education Legal Defense Fund, and she, at the time of all this discussion about various patent changes, but also on the trade front, expanding it was then thinking transnational corporations. There are really no allegiance anymore. Many of them founded in America a century before, but they kind of relinquished that allegiance almost. And she pointed to, if you're going to change the patent system, we ought to require them, which the TRIPS Act kind of lays the groundwork for, require other countries to adopt the same gold standard that we had in, say, 1984, the patent system, and instead of dumbing ours down to take in things that are features of weak patent systems around the world. And to me, that's the problem, and that's gets back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, is the legislative solution isn't a solution. Whatever particular legislation that's typically trotted out, it's something that will damage our patent system and weaken patent rights and IP rights rather than strengthen them and make them secure and reliable. And if we did restore that ourselves, and then also advocated and insisted upon other countries adopting things that are qualities of our patent system once we get it fixed. No PTAB, those kind of things. So that would help to make things better in a human flourishing standpoint for everybody around the world.
Yeah. There's so much that has changed over time. I do find it interesting that as we have been weakening our patent system, that our trade representatives and ambassadors all around the world have been encouraging other countries to do it the way that we used to do it, not the way that we're doing it now. And a lot of them are making changes and adopting, and you see the rankings from the Chamber of Commerce getting closer and closer every year. There's a whole bunch of countries that are really trying to do better, and for some of the countries, they couldn't help but do better. Anything that they would have done would have been better. But most of the world seems to understand that this is an opportunity, and in a way that we in the United States don't seem to get. And there's so much that I don't get anymore. And maybe it's just, maybe it's always been this way. But if it's not broken, don't fix it. Things were working pretty well the way they were. Maybe you could tweak the system a little bit as it going around. And there's this idea of, I remember the globalists used to say, we need to, in America, do it the way they do it over in Europe. Well, you don't hear that anymore so much. And I think it's because the way that they do it in Europe, with respect to a lot of things, is the way we used to do it.
Yes.
And we've changed. And so they don't want to do it the way that they do it in Europe anymore. They want to do it differently. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I try and make sense of the world, and I can't really make sense of the world, other than going back to what I was talking about earlier, is that your problem, whatever your problem is the most important. You want that solved. And there doesn't seem to be in the courts and in Congress anybody looking at whether that solution for you, for your issue that you're bringing to us, is the right one for the system and consequently the country.
Yes, that's the confluence of several issue areas together complicates things. I mean, you've got intellectual property, you've got antitrust, and they conflate in some instances, right? You've got trade and you've got intellectual property, and those kind of join up sometimes and overlap in certain respects. And so all of those things complicate it because you get people whose focus is on one little area, whether it's intellectual property or whether it's just patents or whether it's just trade or if it's just antitrust, and their view of the world is altogether different, and it becomes hard in a modern society to resolve those as policy matters.
Yeah, and a lot of this on the global stage is much more of a trade issue. Mm-hmm. I think like for respect our friends in the pharmaceutical industry, I'm not so sure that they have a patent problem like many people have portrayed it. I think it's a trade problem, right? And you see, like, people can buy these drugs outside the U.S. for less money, and you look at that and you say, well, how does that make any sense? How is that, like? And then people need the drugs. A lot of people are on fixed incomes or lower incomes, and like, well, why does somebody in Canada or India or elsewhere around the world, why do they get to pay so much less for the same drug that costs me like a ridiculous amount here in the U.S.? And that's a hard question to answer, right?
Well,
and then
it's pretty simple.
Patents get blamed, but it's a trade problem, I think.
It is a trade problem, and an absence of spine on the part of the United States to demand different. And the problem is, most of those countries that are cited, they have socialized systems. Some are kind of centralized government anyway, heavily regulatory handed, and they have the ability in their socialized government-run health system to be monopsony power is exercised, mm-hmm. and the companies go to their health systems in these other countries, and they one by one they meet with them, and it's always an unfair bargain. It's an unfair negotiation because their government is the monopsony power holder and demands you sell me that medicine for this little pittance of what its market value is. It's like the mob, only this is a legalized version of it because it's government. It's government crooks, not private crooks.
Yeah, it's price fixing. That's what they're doing. They're just,
yes.
If you or I engaged in what these other countries are doing in the pharmaceutical area, we would probably go to jail.
They'd throw you in the antitrust jail.
Yeah, and if not put in jail, you would get ruinous fines.
Yes.
I mean, so but we draw the short straw because patents kill fits on a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
It's not like patents save lives. I mean, patents save lives for God's sake. This is what, without any of these drugs, and I always find it interesting, and I don't even know why I say it anymore because it doesn't seem to resonate. But if you go and you look at the World Health Organization, and they have a list of, it's now probably about 405 to 410 of the essential drugs in the world. 98% of them were patented once upon a time. Mm-hmm. Most of them are no longer patented. So they're free to be used. So this isn't a question about whether patents have done their job and are now these drugs can be given away for free. It's always about, we want this latest, greatest, newest drug free or practically free. And what we're doing is we're talking about, can we take away the most valuable drug from this company so that they can't make any money, so they go bankrupt, so we don't get any more drugs from them ever again.
It's a commoditization problem. The government's view, whether you're talking the socialized medicine system or the U.S. system, which still has a bit of free market element to it with private health insurance and other things. So there is something of a market at work still in the United States. And the benefit to us as a practical matter is, one, access to more drugs, more new drugs, new products sooner much sooner than it's ever going to be available to your German or your English or your Canadian, or pick a socialized medicine
there you
system.
go, interjecting fact into an emotional discussion.
I know I can't help myself.
No, I know, but it's funny because it harkens back to what you were talking about before, right? It's by anecdote, because when you actually look at this, and the people who have studied it, and we've had you probably know Arthur Damerich. He was the curator of the Lemelson, director of the Lemelson Project at the Smithsonian for about a decade, and his area of primary expertise and research interest is in pharmaceutical and life sciences, and he's come here. He's been on this stage with us, talking in programs and a couple times in podcasts about this very issue. And if you employ price controls in your country with respect to pharmaceuticals, it's clear what the outcome is. You get less. You get less drugs, you get them slower, and your population suffers. But it's counterintuitive, right? It's like, oh, well, we need to get rid of patents and everything's going to be free. Well, try that and see what happens, because if you don't have a means to own it, then you can't invest in creating it. And the drugs that we want, whether they be drugs or biologics or just medical treatments in general, medical devices, cures for cancer, whatever the case may be, the ones we want the most are the ones that are really pushing the envelope of science.
Yes.
And that means expensive to get.
That's right. Because it took a whole lot of money to invest in all the failed attempts, the ones that didn't make it, to the iteration that did, what was proven to be effective and safe.
So I think, and feel free to disagree with me if you do. I mean, you're in the belly of the beast as it is, in the Capitol all the time, talking to people, advising people, working with people to try and find solutions for the problems. But I still fundamentally think that, if we could strip away, and I realize the 24/7 media cycle is not so much in our industry. We don't have cable news bitching about what we do so much, but there is this consciousness in there that is very much, I think, the cable news mentality, of hate.
Yes.
It's like everybody hates. Hate motivates. Good stories don't motivate people. So I think that to some extent is part of the problem. But if we could get away from that, if we could agree to leave our baggage at the door and get interested people in the room, I think we could probably agree on about 80%.
That's probably true.
And if we could do that, that would be a great start. And then we could figure out the other 10%, my 10% and your 10%. We can continue to argue about that. But it strikes me that what's going on is because I can't get 90% or more of what I want, then I'm not interested in even the 30 or 40% that I want that you'd be willing to give me. And that strikes me as crazy. That's not the way Ronald Reagan did business.
No. And I remain a Reaganite, by the way, on account of that. He was a principled conservative who understood rule of law, private property rights, equal justice, ordered liberty, all those sorts of things. But he also was practical enough to say, I'll negotiate with Tip O'Neill, and if he'll give me half a loaf, I'll take half a loaf, and I'll come back next time for the rest,
right?
Or at least whatever part of the rest I can get, and that's reasonable and practical and the only valid approach. But here's I always think of the I guess about the 2000s, the Congress set up this special group of senators and members of the House to negotiate some kind of budget bargain. And the negotiations started with failure as the likely and ultimate outcome, as it were, of each side demanded the 10% of non-negotiables. These are our non-negotiables. These are our non-negotiables. We only will deal with you if you give up your non-negotiables, and we'll only give to you if you give up your non-negotiables. How stupid is that?
Totally
But
stupid. It's the recipe for not getting to a deal, right? And when I was younger, I didn't understand that. I will admit, earlier in my career, I was like, well, if we're never going to take a deal that doesn't have X, why aren't we starting negotiating on X? And over time, you learn more, you see more, and the stories that your mentors try to instill in you make much more sense the older you get. But if you spend all the time and energy to agree on the 80% that can be achieved, then all of a sudden getting X maybe isn't as critical. Or you spend so much time and energy, then maybe the other side might give you close enough to X, and you might give them close enough to their Y, what their variable that they wanted, that the deal gets done. But if you start with those, then it's just everybody goes to the thermonuclear stage.
Yes.
And do you see any potential for breaking through the thermonuclear stage in the patent space in particular? And if so, this Congress or next Congress, or what say you?
Well, the Congress, after every one of the House and Senate members and this administration and everybody in the previous administrations has read my book, then we have a chance.
So what's the name of the book?
The book is To Invent is Divine, Creativity and Ownership.
Yeah. So, and I've seen it. I liked it. It was a very good read. I would encourage everybody who is in this space, is interested in this sort of conversation, about property rights and about ownership and about fostering innovation and coming together and as you were talking about, bringing the two pieces together that are critical for making this all happen. If that speaks to you, I think you'll find this book great. It's as of we're recording this, it's not yet published, right?
That's right.
It'll be published in a couple of weeks.
Late May.
Late May. Okay, so in time for Father's Day, great Father's Day gift.
Exactly.
So, and the name once more?
To Invent is Divine. It's available for pre-order already on the major book sales sites, and the publisher has it up for pre-order as well. That is Fidelis Publishing, found at faithfultext.com, I believe. Faithful Text is the publisher route. Okay. But it's available anywhere for pre-order. For about a day, it was number one on Amazon, number one best-selling new book.
Oh, great! Congratulations.
In the engineering, invention, and patent category.
So if you are watching this on YouTube, I'll put a link in the caption below. If you're reading listening to this on IPWatchdog, we'll have a link to Jim's book in the article we're going to publish. But Jim, it's always good to see you. Thanks for coming out, my friend, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you, Gene. Great to be with you. I appreciate you having me.